Well, I think we have to keep in mind that Yemen has been on the receiving end of Western military strikes for some time now, since 2014. Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States, backed by Europe, um, provided aircraft, munitions, intelligence, logistics, in a sustained campaign that failed. Ultimately, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other nations were compelled to seek peace because Yemen simply didn't back down. They continued to strike. They were expanding operations, and it was something that Saudi Arabia wasn't prepared to absorb, to do. So Saudi Arabia backed down. Here's the United States. We're months into an aerial campaign that's supposed to deter Yemeni behavior. It's not. The Yemeni continue to not only sustain their actions, but to escalate. This strike against Ben Gurion Airport is an escalation. They're not going to stop their naval blockade. It looks like they're imposing an aerial blockade, and there's nothing the United States and Israel can do to stop this. I want to point out that the United States had no luck so far in interdicting Yemeni ballistic missile or drone operations. It's almost a replay of the Gulf War of 1991, when the United States flew thousands of sorties into Western Iraq to try and stop the Iraqis from launching missiles against Israel unsuccessfully. Right now, the United States is unsuccessful. And I think Yemen is in a very strong position right now. The threat of an aerial blockade, backed up by the reality of a Yemeni missile that can penetrate Israel and American air defense, is something that every party has to take into account. Iran sort of hinted at something when they announced this new missile that they've developed and tested. They said that this missile incorporated technologies that were specifically brought to bear because of anti-ballistic missile efforts by Israel and the United States, demonstrated in Operations True Promise 1 and True Promise 2. That means that Iran has an active intelligence collection and feedback mechanism where they can see how the enemy responds and make adjustments to this. I would believe, and I'm not making allegations here, I'm just saying it's my belief, that there's probably some intelligence sharing between Iran and Yemen, where these lessons learned have been shared with the Yemeni and been incorporated into Yemen's own missile. I don't believe Yemen deliberately missed the Ben Gurion Airport. I believe this was an offset strike. I do that based upon just simple observations, but this was an accelerated warhead that undertook numerous maneuvers to get where it's at, showing capabilities that lend themselves to precision. And so I don't believe that Yemen would undertake everything and then miss. I think that this was a deliberate miss to send a signal, because look at the result. They achieved foreign airlines saying they're not going to fly into Ben Gurion Airport. They've thrown the Israelis into a panic. And now they have the ability to escalate if needed. And if the United States and Israel continue to launch these kind of strikes, which are purely against civilian targets, there was no military component to these strikes. This was a target. These were targets of intimidation, seeking to intimidate the Yemeni population. That's a war crime by any other definition. The United States is just backing itself into a deeper problem here. And remember, part of the American goal is to deter Yemen, but the other part is to deter Iran. And if the United States is learning anything from this, because we have to remember, it was just last week that Yemen showed that it can target an American aircraft carrier. They compelled the USS Truman to carry out an emergency maneuver to avoid being struck. It was so violent that it caused an F-A-18 aircraft to be thrown overboard. This is not a good thing when an American carrier battle group can be threatened in that way. I think a previous carrier had a Yemeni rocket land 200 meters off of its stern. This is not a good thing. If we keep playing this game, the Yemeni are going to get this target solution down, and they're going to actually hit an American carrier. And remember that intelligence back and forth? I think Iran is learning a lot from this as well. So this is not a good look for the United States. The Yemeni are determined. They're not going to back down. But we know one thing. If Israel simply ceases and desists its ongoing military operations against Gaza and respects the ceasefire, Yemen will stop its operations. It's done so in the past, and that's what it's saying today needs to happen. So the solution isn't to try and bomb Yemen into submission. That hasn't worked, and it won't work. The solution is to get Israel to comply with its obligations under a ceasefire that was negotiated back before Trump became president.
Professor. Yes, I agree. I think it's clear that the missile did not strike the airport on purpose. It was a warning shot. The fact that it had such a high degree of maneuverability, I think, is indication of that. And Scott is right. Yemen has gone through much worse before, actually. When the Saudis attacked, and we should remember that uh, Obama gave the Saudis the green light to attack Yemen. He's not really any different from Biden or Trump. But when he gave the green light, it was not just Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Qatar and Turkey and the whole region, all of the countries in the region that are aligned to the United States, they supported the onslaught. And the British were sending advisors, especially for the Air Force. The Americans were in the Red Sea helping enforce a blockade. The Canadians, Europeans, everyone was a part of this genocidal campaign. And they bombed weddings. They bombed a funeral once where roughly 1,000 people were killed at that funeral. So all the atrocities that you can think of were carried out by back then. But gradually, Yemen grew stronger, and ultimately, their drone and missile capabilities increased so much that the Saudis felt that they had to stop fighting, and they agreed to a ceasefire because Yemen was striking Saudi oil installations and uh, creating huge challenges for them with regards to oil exports. So I don't see any hope for the Americans, and especially Trump, to do any better than the Saudis, who are neighbors. The Americans have to bring in aircraft carriers. It's very costly for them to carry out these airstrikes. The Israeli regime, they need American support. It's very costly for them to fly all the way from near Tel Aviv to Yemen. And it's only going to hurt them, their image further. It's going to make Yemen look heroic as it is, and they will be more popular. Ansarullah is now a name that across the region people revere. Uh, it's not going well at all for the United States. It's not going well at all for Trump. It's not going well at all for Netanyahu. And I think that there's no doubt that Scott's uh, what he said is true. That obviously Yemen has its own military capabilities, but Iran is assisting Yemen. Iran does not hide that fact. And new technologies are being developed. We recall how almost all of Iran's missiles got through in True Promise 2. And after the Israeli strike and uh, during the last few months, the Iranians have been spending a lot of money to upgrade their missiles and drones and air defenses for any potential major conflict with the United States. So that technological cooperation, I'm guessing, is pretty good, and I think that the Israelis, if they don't stop the genocide in Gaza, that they're going to face further difficulties and further pain from Yemen. And this also, I think, is a reminder that if there is a conflict between Iran and the Israeli regime, if they can't stop one missile from Yemen, which is being fired from 2,000 kilometers away, there's no way in the world that they're going to stop hundreds upon hundreds of missiles from Iran.
Scott, do you feel that Netanyahu is concerned about what's going on, or because we know that in the Trump administration, I don't know if you saw the article in Washington Post, says that Mike Waltz behind the scene was somehow coordinating with Netanyahu and his administration to push for this war, direct war with Iran. How do you see the Trump administration right now, and do you see the report as honest as the way that they were picturing the situation with the Trump administration?
Well, Netanyahu almost immediately responded and said this wasn't true. Now, he has a reason to say that because he doesn't want to admit that he was carrying out behind the scenes discussions with the National Security Advisor that the President of the United States wasn't aware of. And Netanyahu isn't a man known for his ability to adhere to the truth. So I would take Netanyahu's statement with a grain of salt, but I also take the statement of the White House with a grain of salt because the Trump administration is not known for its honesty. What I do believe is happening is that the Trump administration's mouth has written a check that the American body is not prepared to cash. In posturing and threatening military force, we have done a repeat of what Barack Obama did in 2014. If you remember, and Professor Marandi knows as well, in 2012, 2013, Obama was making statements about, if Iran, we will not tolerate an Iranian nuclear bomb. If Iran is going to build one, we will use military force. All options are on the table. And then in 2014, when it became clear that Iran wasn't going to be intimidated and to back down, Obama had no choice but to change the American policy from not one spinning centrifuge to, yep, we're going to allow a nuclear enrichment program. And that's how the JCPOA came into play. Today we have, Trump, making similar statements, but the situation is far dire. As Professor Marandi has indicated, Iran currently possesses a conventional ballistic missile capability that can, if not destroy Israel as a modern functioning state, do serious harm to Israel. I mean, Israel will not walk away from a major war with Iran intact. It can also do harm to American military facilities. We don't have the ability to protect our facilities from an Iranian missile attack. We would be exposed at the mercy of Iran. And we're talking about some significant facilities, for instance, Al Udeid Air Base, where we have a large number of strategically important aircraft that are deployed. We have other bases in the region that would come under attack. This would be the price we pay. And the only way, and this is where I get in trouble, but I'm just being honest, the only way the United States wins in an exchange is to use nuclear weapons. We have a doctrine that allows us to do that. We have an employment plan, and we have positioned the nuclear capable delivery systems in the theater. We have an Ohio-class submarine right now armed with Trident missiles that have W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapons on board. They're ready to use them. We have B-61 bombs pre-deployed in Hawaii. It's just one short flight away from Diego Garcia where they'll assemble the weapons, put them on B-2s, go in. We have Tomahawk cruise missiles that have nuclear warheads on board. This is the only way we can even think of achieving a military victory with Iran, because conventionally we can't do it. We don't have the capacity to do this. First of all, we're using up all of our conventional munitions in this failed military operation against Yemen. We've used a vast number of these precision-guided munitions that we don't have an infinite stockpile of them. And if we continue this strike against Yemen, we start eating down the assets we have in the Pacific that we're supposed to use against a potential war in China, or the assets we have in Europe that we're supposed to use in case of a NATO war against Russia. We're going to chew all those down. And at the end of the day, we won't be able to implement a conventional war plan against Iran. So Trump is looking at a situation where he has boxed himself into a corner where the only military, plan that he has that could guarantee an American victory is one that nobody could even Donald Trump in his worst day can't comprehend using. And so Trump is, even though he's put himself in this corner, I see diplomatically, he's trying to find a way out. But here he's imperiled by his own administration. Professor Marandi have talked about this before. I believe that the only way out of this is a negotiated settlement that creates a JCPOA type environment. And there appeared that there was negotiations in the way, on way. I think they got a third round. They were talking about a fourth round where they were actually talking about the technical aspects of a monitoring regime. This is like the off-ramp. And Trump blew it. Steve Witkoff went in there, listened to the Iranians, when does an American listen to the Iranians? We never listen to the Iranians. Steve Witkoff listened to the Iranians, came back and reported accurately, and there was a deal to be made. But then Netanyahu and the biggest enemy of Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, stepped in, and they've come up with the zero nuclear program. Iran will never accept this, ever. We learned this back in 2012 to 2014. Iran has linked its national pride, its national honor, its dignity, its sovereignty, everything that a nation uses to define themselves. Iran has linked to their peaceful nuclear program, their nuclear enrichment program, and they simply aren't going to give that up, especially not to Donald Trump and his bluster. So Trump's in a problem right now where, there is a solution, but politically he's blocked the solution. He's demanding complete dismantlement of Iran's program. Iran won't go for that. Therefore, that opens up war, which we can't win unless we use nuclear weapons. Trump is his own worst enemy on this one. He is literally floundering, and it's because of Marco Rubio. I mean, I have to say, Mike Waltz, I believe, was working with the Israelis behind the scenes, and he got called out, and Rubio had him fired. I think this is a power play by Rubio, because now Rubio is both Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, which creates a whole bunch of constitutional issues. But now he is the man running the totality of the foreign policy, national security policy for the United States. And Marco Rubio is incapable of dealing responsibly with Iran. He is the worst possible candidate as a man being the interlocutor between the United States and Iran. The same thing with Russia. He has caused whatever passed for a peace effort to collapse. Marco Rubio is a tool of the Zionists, a tool of Netanyahu, and Trump is a prisoner of these people. And we're in an impossible situation right now. I am very concerned. Iran is doing what it has to do. If I were the Iranians, I would have too launched a new missile and said, aha, whatever you think. Because remember, America, we have a Secretary of Defense who's a man-child. He's not really an adult. He's just this boy playing at warrior. And he was briefed by the Department of Defense that, we evaluated the Iranian attack too, in True Promise. Those warheads are very, very capable warheads, but, they required electronic functionality. We knew that. We knew there's a lot of things happening up there. So we've developed capabilities to jam them. And so we've deployed jammers who are going to, as these missiles come in, we're going to make their electronics not work, and the missile's not going to do what it wants to do. And what Iran just did is went, yeah, we're aware of what you were doing, and we got a missile now that beats your jammer. And I think the Yemeni missile that was fired in there beats the jammer too. And so Iran and Yemen have both said, you ain't got nothing on us. We're here. We're ready to do this. And again, hopefully somebody's briefing the president, Tulsi Gabbard, saying, Mr. President, we don't want to do this. There isn't a solution. There isn't a military solution. I mean, even if we're going to talk about a conventional air campaign to try and drop down Iranian capabilities, which we can't do, any targeteer knows this, we ran out of the weapons. We've used them all against Yemen. We don't have the stocks necessary. We're out of precision guided munitions. And what is the president going to do? And again, this is why I think the solution ultimately is going to be the president's going to have to put pressure on Israel to get them to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. That's the face-saving mechanism. It doesn't make it look like we were afraid to deal with Iran militarily, but we are. I mean, I have to be honest about this. Iran right now holds all the cards conventionally, and the only card we have is a nuclear card. And thank goodness Donald Trump doesn't yet want to play that card. It would be a disaster. It would be a humanitarian disaster, diplomatic disaster. It's stupidity personified. But that's where we're at right now. We've put ourselves in a very difficult position, but Iran ain't making it easy for us because they're pretty damn good at what they do. And this isn't Iran blustering. Iran has real capabilities, and these capabilities can cause significant harm. And I hate to say it, but we're in a position right now where we need Iranian maturity, because you ain't getting any out of Washington, D.C. We need the Iranians to be the mature players here. And they've shown historically that they possess that capacity. So we'll see what's going to happen. But I don't have too much faith in the Trump administration anymore. I thought for a moment that Trump would listen to Steve Witkoff, because Steve Witkoff was listening to the Iranians. I thought this was a great moment. I was really happy. But it appears that Marco Rubio's voice is louder than Steve Witkoff's voice, and the potential for a diplomatic off-ramp, if it hasn't totally collapsed, is collapsing as we speak.
Professor Marandi, it's not just about Washington Post and their report on the case of Mike Waltz. We know that the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said that Netanyahu is doing everything to put an end to the talks between Iran and the United States. Your take, how does Iran see the case of the Trump administration?
Yes, well, Iran has a lot of information about what goes on in Washington. It has good friends across the global south. It has people inside the United States. It has people, experts who deal with events in the United States. So they pretty well know much what they need to know. And what Scott says is absolutely correct. And in fact, I think it goes much further than Iran. We saw that Trump really became president with the promise to end the war in Ukraine. And if he had ended that war on day one, if he had said in the first week or two that I'm stopping this, it's not my war, it's Biden's war, as he keeps saying, even though he helped expand the armed forces of Ukraine, he gave them weapons, he did much more than Obama ever did. But that aside, he could have said that this is Biden's war. If I was president, it never would have happened, and I'm stopping this. And he didn't do that. And now, after more than 100 days, it's becoming increasingly difficult for him to do that, because he would have had a mandate back then. He had the momentum. He won all the swing states. He got the majority vote in the United States, unlike in the previous time when he was elected. He could have done that, but he was too cowardly, or he was too weak to make that decision. And if he had made that decision, they could have screamed bloody murder, but he would have done it, and I think most Americans would have been happy with that. He failed. He failed to do what he promised to do, and now we see that they're beginning to give the Ukrainian armed forces weapons again, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any ceasefire anytime soon. And the killing is going to continue, and the Russians are going to, as the three of us have been talking about for years now, the Russians are going to win this war. So when Trump is failing in Ukraine, which he spoke about before being elected so often, then I think that tells us a lot about Trump and his weakness. We can say the same thing about the tariff war and the way in which he keeps flip-flopping, and the way in which the people around him are flip-flopping on the tariff war, and how poorly that is going for the United States. And I would also add an agreement that he actually signed, because when it comes to the JCPOA, of course, he tore up the deal. But the Gaza ceasefire was his ceasefire. Witkoff, we were told, at least, who knows, but we were told that on a Saturday he went and read the Riot Act to Netanyahu and forced a ceasefire the day before Trump became president. But then, literally weeks later, he was the one who undermined his own ceasefire by saying the Palestinians must go, they must be ethnically cleansed, and then the Israelis reimposed Netanyahu. The Israelis, they reimposed the starvation siege, and as a result, Yemen said they'll shut down the Red Sea again to ships linked to the regime. And then he gave the green light for the genocide to restart. So on the one hand, he made a promise in Ukraine, never fulfilled. He had a deal that he carried. It was his deal. He effectively was the one who tore up his own deal. And then, of course, in the tariff war, we see that he has no solution. It seems clear to me that they did not think this through. And so this is the person that Iran's looking at. They're looking at his track record. They're looking at the people around him and saying, okay, let's say somehow this guy, we have a deal. Let's say even though he keeps changing his position, he's been changing his position for the last few weeks. But let's say somehow Trump is able to close his mouth and let Witkoff do what Witkoff supposedly should be doing. And then we have a deal. Then what? What happens the next day? We wake up in the morning and then Trump posts something on Truth Social and says, I don't want this deal anymore. It's a situation which really, for which there's no real solution. There's no easy solution. I think it's almost impossible to have a solution with the United States in such turmoil.
Scott, I don't know if you saw the interview that Donald Trump had with MSNBC, in which he said, just when he was asked about the situation with Ukraine, he said that these two leaders are hating each other. And he doesn't mention anything substantial in terms of what's going on in Ukraine. He said, I got a deal with Ukraine, so European Union has its own sort of ability to take whatever they want from their frozen Russian assets. Do you see anything substantial coming to the background of his mind when it comes to Ukraine, for example, that he was bragging about before coming to power?
I'm going to answer the question, but just so you know, it's going to cost me my passport, and it may cost me my computers down the road.
Well, then don't push it.
No, I'm joking. I could care less. I mean, this is America. Either we have free speech or we don't, and I'm afraid that we don't. But I'm not going to surrender. Look, I never liked Donald Trump. When he came down the escalator in 2015, I thought he was a buffoon, a fool, and I called him that. I thought I hate, if you know anything about me, I hate John McCain. I view him as a warmongering, you know what. But he served the United States military. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and he behaved with honor as a prisoner of war. And Donald Trump denigrated his service and criticized him because he was captured. This is from a man who has bone spurs that kept him out of Vietnam. Donald Trump has no right to talk about the heroism of anybody, especially those who served, who flew combat missions, were shot down and held prisoner and refused to be released early, even though he could have, because his father was commander-in-chief of the Pacific Forces. He stayed as a prisoner until he was released on time with everybody else. Again, what McCain became after that, I despise. But his service, it deserves recognition as being honorable. And Donald Trump was unable to do that because he's a very petty man. A very petty man. Donald Trump went after an American judge of Hispanic origin, saying that no Hispanic should ever be judging me. This is a man who has total disregard. In that same interview, he spoke about the Constitution, saying, I don't know, Fourth Amendment? No, I may not do it. How? He's the president who took an oath to the Constitution. Now he's saying that he's not going to implement it, that he doesn't know if he's going to implement it. Well, then I know that you shouldn't be president of the United States, and this is the reality. But he was running against the candidate, Kamala Harris, who I still believe to this day, had she been elected, we might have already had a nuclear war with Russia. We were headed in that direction. One thing you can say about Donald Trump is that we entered into active negotiations with the Russians. They have failed. They have collapsed, but at least we were talking. That never would have happened with Kamala Harris. She would have continued policies that the Biden administration had begun, which brought us to the brink of nuclear war in November, December of last year. So I voted for Trump to avoid a nuclear war. I voted for Trump on the belief that he would make a good faith effort to carry out these peace policies that he was talking about. He spoke, Professor Marandi, in September of last year, he was saying things about Iran that no American president have said. Meaning, I'm not for regime change. I think the Iranian regime should be allowed to be there and prosper, and I want sanctions lifted. Okay. Let's see you do that. I'm all in favor of that. I'll give that a shot. He wanted peace in Ukraine and peace with Russia, better relations. So I gave him 100 days. I held my fire. I held my tongue because I understand he's a man-child. I understand that he is not an adult, that he may need some effective guidance from people to keep him pushing in the right direction. I tolerated his stupid posts, his Truth Social lunacy. I even held my tongue when he pretended that he was the ideal candidate to be Pope. I mean, humiliating over 1 billion Catholics. It shows that he has no regard for people of faith. And trust me, if he can't respect the Catholics, he isn't going to respect the Muslims either. He's not going to respect the Shia. He has no concept of religious tolerance. And yet, and so now we see what he's done here. This collapse of he's a man who has no concept of reality. He lives in his own narcissistic fueled world. And that narcissism is his fatal flaw because he has to emerge from everything he does as the dominant person, as the victor, and everybody else can't be equal. They must be defeated. This is why, now that I can speak freely, Professor Marandi, Iran shouldn't trust this man as far as they can throw him. And I know you know that. I know you know that. But this is a man incapable of entering the kind of deal that would be needed. Obama, at least, had enough humility to say, we have to make a compromise. So he went from no spinning centrifuges to accepting Iran's nuclear enrichment program. That's what we need to do today. We need to back away from our hardline position and make a compromise. This president can't do that because he views that as a humiliation, as a sign of weakness instead of the sign of greatness that it is. A man great enough to make compromises to bring about peace. He can't make any compromises, and so now he's made the situation much worse. The war in Ukraine will end, and it will end with a Russian victory, but it's going to end as a war, not as a special military operation. And when Russia makes the decision, I think that decision is going to be made very soon, because Russia's not going to sit around now that Trump is actively supporting the Ukrainians, actively working with Europe to expend $800 billion to rearm. They're not going to sit around and let these forces coalesce and elongate this war and bleed Russia to death, which is the objective here, the long, slow death by 1,000 cuts. Russia's in a superior position right now. And I believe that this summer, Russia is going to take some decisive action that's designed to break the back of the Ukraine. And Trump will be humiliated by this. Iran, I don't know. I mean, again, the Iranians have to make decisions. I don't think Iran wants a military war. But, you know, the fact is, this may come down to Iran having to slap Israel around a little bit. And then absorb whatever punishment comes their way. It won't be nuclear, but it'll be conventional. I think Iran is going to have to fight a war with Israel, not to destroy Israel. I would advise the Iranians, do not unleash the totality of your capability, because then you sort of force hands. But if Iran were to go in there and show that it can do serious harm to Israel, serious harm, and still have reserve capacity to finish the job, Israel will have to take some action, and the United States will have to make a choice. Are we going to commit suicide on behalf of Israel, or are we going to have to back down? But this is a man-child that we have here. This is literally the worst president the American people have ever elected, because he's so unpresidential. I despise Joe Biden, but Joe Biden could be presidential at times when his brain functioned. Even when his presidential behavior, I opposed. I was against the policies. This is a man who can't be presidential. He's incapable of being presidential, because to be presidential, you have to have humility to the Constitution, humility and fealty to the Constitution, and humility before the American people and the world. If you're going to be the world's strongest man, then you have to be a man capable of being humble with that strength. And Donald Trump isn't the strongest man. He's a weak man. He bends to all the pressure that's put on him. He doesn't know what he stands for, except if Donald Trump doesn't emerge number one, then he doesn't want to do it. Well, that's not how the world works. The world isn't built to make Donald Trump the most popular narcissist on the planet. The world is built for people to live in peace and prosperity, and Donald Trump isn't the man capable of heading us in that direction.
Professor Marandi, is the situation, as Scott mentioned, driving us toward a direct confrontation between Iran and Israel?
It's possible. There's no doubt that Netanyahu is pushing for war, as the Iranian foreign minister pointed out. And as Scott also pointed out, Trump has pushed himself into a corner. He's painted himself in a corner. So it is possible. The Iranians, of course, are not going to encourage war, but at the same time, while they negotiate, they will be preparing themselves for military conflict. Negotiating with the United States has two benefits. One is that if it fails, the world will blame the United States, and the West no longer has that monopoly on the narrative, as we're seeing. The global majority is angry about, is outraged about Gaza. It's outraged about the trade war. And the United States has been weakened by the war in Ukraine. So they no longer control the narrative like they did before. Even inside the United States itself, we see that the mood is shifting quite dramatically. It's been only 19 months, even though it's been like forever. We're seeing this slaughter take place day and night. But it's only been 19 months, and the sea change inside the United States itself with regards to Israel, the Israeli regime, is huge, and it will probably continue. At the rest of the world, it's the hostility towards the regime is enormous. I just returned from China. I was in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, and everywhere I went, there were people were angry and hostile towards the regime. So the negotiations that take place, the very fact that Iran is carrying out these indirect negotiations, is that they want the global South, the global majority public opinion, to see the problem as being an American problem. But then, on the other hand, if the United States is open to an agreement, a reasonable agreement that where the Americans respect Iran's sovereignty, then that's fine too. But Iran is preparing itself. The last few months, Iran has gained a lot of intelligence about the U.S. and Israeli defense capabilities through True Promise 1 and 2, and I'm sure through Yemen and what's going on in Yemen. And at the same time, the Israeli regime, its airstrikes and U.S. support for those airstrikes has given Iran a lot of intelligence. It's the first time that Iran has been dealing with airstrikes since Saddam Hussein's the Western-backed war against Iran by Saddam Hussein. So the Iranians are using these months to prepare themselves. But what I would like to also point out is that it's really quite fascinating that Trump wanted to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine to focus on China and probably on West Asia. But what he's actually done is the exact opposite. He's reinforcing the relationship between Moscow and Beijing and Moscow and Tehran. And he is also dividing U.S. power and the power of the West, whatever that means nowadays, and taking into account the divide between Europe and the United States. So what is happening is that he cannot focus on Iran. He cannot divide Iran and separate Iran and Russia. I don't think he could have anyway, but he could have tried to create some distance. And of course, the same being with China. And then with the trade war, and this I think is the most fascinating thing. After the proxy war in Ukraine, until the proxy war in Ukraine, it was, to be very blunt, Iran was more proactive in its relationship with Russia. Russia was always cautious because of the sanctions, because of the threats made by the United States. Even the UN Security Council resolutions that were imposed on Iran, Russia and China didn't want any of those UN resolutions. But they were weaker back then. The United States was the stronger power. All they could do was they could water them down. And they did. And all those UN sanctions, the Russians and the Chinese worked hard to water them down as far as they could within that framework where the Americans were still the hyperpower. So after the war in Ukraine, it really reversed. The Russians were seeking better relations with Iran. They were pushing for expanding the relationship, and the Iranians worked with the Russians, and the relationship has changed dramatically at all levels: economic, social, political, and so on. China was cautious because of the sanctions. But in general, China, it's like, as I don't recall who told me this, but some Chinese professor once said this to me maybe a decade ago, maybe more. I don't recall who it was. But he said China is like a super tanker. When it wants to turn around, it goes very slow. What Trump did with the tariff war was that he turned this super tanker into a speedboat. And China just shifted in a way in which we've never seen before, at least in this era. And now the Chinese-Russian relationship is much stronger than before. The Chinese-Iranian relationship is much stronger than before. So Trump, he's he's been acting as a catalyst to bring all this, and then it's not just Iran, Russia, and China, because it's the whole, the global South. It's even Europeans and the Japanese, and everyone is angry, the Canadians. So he has isolated the United States. He's strengthened the bonds between those countries that the United States like to see as its enemies. Iran doesn't want the United States as an enemy. The Russians don't want the United States as an enemy. The Chinese don't want the United States as an enemy, but the Americans have chosen to make them their enemies. So he's acted as a catalyst to bring, and of course, in the case of Ukraine, it was Biden too, but Trump, by failing to bring about any real change in U.S. policy, ultimately, as we're now seeing, is continuing to be that catalyst. So he's acting as a catalyst to isolate the United States, just focusing on Iran, to have Iran have allies, powerful allies, regional allies, allies across the global South, and where the bond between key countries for Iran, China, and Russia, has become much stronger than before, and it is Beijing and Moscow that is more proactive than they ever have been in the past in expanding that sort of relationship. How much of a failure can you be? I mean, how can you do things worse for the United States than what Trump is doing? It would be pretty hard indeed.
Scott, the picture that Professor Marandi is giving us shows how the world has changed. And you mentioned, you compared the Obama administration to Donald Trump. And do you think that is there any sort of understanding in the current administration, in the Trump administration, to compare the position that they're in to the position that Obama had in those days, or maybe Joe Biden?
This would require a level of introspection that can only come with humility and intelligence. And this administration isn't known for either. I mean, probably the best person best positioned is Tulsi Gabbard, but she's not a policymaker. She provides intelligence. And you saw with her, when she did her threat assessment, global threat assessment, the assessment she put out about Iran was a very specific assessment designed to create the potential for negotiation. I mean, she did her job, and she has been advocating against, military action against Iran. But, she's been pushed to the side by both the National Security Advisor, who's now fired, and now Secretary Rubio, who's also the National Security Advisor. So, no, I don't think this administration possesses that capacity. Professor Marandi is 100% correct. I mean, if in a perfect world, Donald Trump would be arrested for treason, because what he's done to harm the United States of America it borders on treason. These are actions that can't be said just bad policy. These are actions which are deliberate in nature and achieve a result which is predictable. It's not that you don't know what's going to happen when you do these things. The mere fact that we turned the supertanker into a speedboat alone is a huge defeat for the United States, because we did have some leverage on China. The thing is, what the United States possessed before Trump became president, yes, we are a superpower that's reached our maximum growth. But that doesn't mean it's over. It's just like when you study the history of the Byzantine Empire, maximum growth, but then there's a period of time of sustainment, and then the empire starts to get whittled away, but it takes a long time to bring the empire down. What Trump has done is we're at our maximum growth. What we should have been doing is leveraging the influence that we have, the ability to play one side off against another cleverly, to change narratives where needed. For instance, the Ukraine conflict, become a messenger of peace. Now we have more influence with Russia, which means that we can subtly say to Russia, you might want to not do that deal with Iran. And Russia might have listened, because they're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of trade with America. But, things. I can't guarantee outcomes. I can't speak on behalf of the Russians. I'm just saying, from an American point of view, there were leverage that we could play. If I were a policy guy, I would say we need to make sure we have as much input into Iran as possible. Not control, but we need to be talking with Iran. We need to make sure that if we make a phone call, Iran picks up on the other end. That alone is an ability to influence. The fact that Iran would be willing to pick up a phone call and listen is a good thing. It's a great thing. We could have done all this and been clever. Instead, Donald Trump has just come in and he shot himself in both feet. Then he shot himself in this shoulder and this shoulder. And now he's getting ready to pull the trigger on his head. He has accelerated the demise of the United States. We're not in a position of sustaining maximum growth. He is literally collapsing the empire from below. He's taking the foundation out. Nobody trusts us anymore. Nobody takes us seriously anymore. All we are is a big goofy person with a big, with a bunch of weaponry, and we're running out of those weaponry. Why do you think we have $1 trillion defense budget, which, by the way, goes against what Donald Trump promised the American people? We have $1 trillion defense budget because we don't have any weapons left. We have to buy them all. We gave them all to Ukraine. We've thrown them all at Yemen. We got nothing left to fight with. So we're going to have to spend money that we don't have on an economy that's being destroyed because of stupid tariff policies. This guy is literally doing everything he can to facilitate the collapse of the United States. And it's not a good time to be an American. I'll tell you that. This is a man who said he wanted to make America great again. He's made America an embarrassment. He's made America a failure. Anything but great. This is other than the fact that we avoided short-term a nuclear conflict with Russia, this president has achieved nothing positive at all.